Hello friends and welcome back to Sorry What. Today I have for you the second part of our two-part Scorched Earth revenge story. This is where all the suffering happens, so go and get comfortable because without further ado, here's part 2. Despite showering after the woman left, Sue showered again in the morning. To her dismay, she had a lump on her lip where he had bitten her, and there were purple bruise marks on her melons and thighs, where he had been so rough with her. Her back passage felt sore, and using the loo there were traces of blood, admittedly small amounts, but it was there nonetheless. To top it all, of her throat was exceedingly sore, and her voice a mere croak. She started to panic as to how she was going to explain this all to Dave when she finally made it home that evening. She struggled through the day. She remembered how her friend Sarah came into work after her first extramarital liaison like a woman in charge of the world. Sue felt the opposite. She felt lowly and worthless, retreating into a mental shell she had constructed during the day. Driving home, each signpost felt as if the reducing mileages were just a countdown to her life as she knew it ending. She had come up with a plan, but was not confident that it would buy her enough time to heal up in some places before Dave noticed. After parking on the driveway, she made her way to the front door, feeling like a condemned woman walking to the gallows. Never again, she vowed to herself. As she opened the door, Dave had seen her pull up and was currently making 2 cups of tea. The aroma of a chicken cooking soothed her slightly. This was how her life should be. Walking up behind him, she wrapped her arms around him tightly, trying hard not to burst into tears as she buried her face into his back. He turned around and his face changed as soon as he saw her puffy lip. "What the duck happened, Sue?" It was the moment of truth. Her marriage would likely hinge on him believing the next sentence. "At breakfast this morning, an old deer stumbled into me as I was taking a mouthful of my breakfast. I bit my lip as she fell against me. To top it all off, I think I've got the flu or something coming. I've got a sore throat, starting to lose my voice, and I have a temperature. I feel so cheap at the moment. Please just wrap your arms around me and hold me." Dave complied, but there was a small suspicion. He had spoken to her less than 24 hours earlier. She never mentioned feeling unwell in any way. In fact, she had seemed quite bubbly in her room. He decided he would do a little discreet digging later. He dished up dinner, noting she was very downcast, nothing like the vibrant person she normally was. Was she run down and unwell? She cried off sleeping with him, telling him she didn't want to pass on any germs to him, so she slept in the spare room. Rather than sit with him for the entire evening watching TV, she sat for half an hour before retiring to the spare bedroom. Dave took her suitcase upstairs and emptied it. If asked, the reason was he wanted to make a washing load for the machine. Going through the case, it was all the same clothes she had packed. No new items had suddenly materialized. It made him feel better. He still struggled with the thought she may still harbor this destructive idea of sleeping with a stranger. Around 2 in the morning, Dave woke up. He had been woken by a noise coming from the spare room. Creeping along the landing, he listened at the door and could hear Sue crying quietly. Opening the door, he could just about make out her silhouette laying in the bed. "Hey, what's wrong, honey? Are you sure you're okay?" He was greeted by the sound of sniffles and a broken, croaky voice, asking for him to hold her. He moved over to the bed, pulled back the covers and climbed in next to her. Despite her protest, he could catch whatever bug she had caught. He shushed her, then spooned against her body. Being apart from each other, plus Sue feeling the need to show her love for her husband, they were soon making love tenderly in the darkness of the room. As they lay in the afterglow, Dave felt sure he could see the dim light in the room reflect off tear-stained eyes. Again, asking if she was okay, was greeted with the words, "I love you, Dave. I love you with all my heart." By Sunday evening, Sue was feeling better. The signs of the sexual escapades were barely visible, although she still had some mild pain in her pelvic region, which she put down to the battering both her kitty and backside had been subject to. Sunday night, she was back in bed with Dave, and did her best to restore the sexual dynamo, be his own little corn star, or Moltz as he called her. It may not have been as it was a month ago, but she could get back on her game over the coming days. It would help banish memories of the ill-fated liaison back in the hotel. The following Thursday, the pains in her pelvic region had not abated. In fact, they felt worse. Then there was something else too, something that worried her. When she went to pee, it stung and there was a yellowy-green discharge from her kitty. She prayed to herself, "Please God, no, don't let this be an STD." With trepidation, she went to the walk-in sexual health clinic at the hospital, after calling work telling them she had an emergency doctor's appointment. 2 hours later, she stood in the hospital car park, shocked, wishing a bolt of lightning would strike her down. The results wouldn't be confirmed for 48 hours, but it was extremely likely she had contracted gonorrhea by the symptoms she had. They had given her an initial injection of antibiotics, and made it clear she should contact all of her sexual partners, as they would need testing too. She was embarrassed when she said she couldn't name one of her partners, and that the other was her husband. She asked how long before her husband would have symptoms, and they warned her he may not show any, but, for the sake of his health, she must tell him so he can get tested. She felt like a cornered rat with no way out. When she finally made it to work, she had barely sat at her desk when the office manager called her asking for her to come to her office. Instead of the usual informal attitude, this was full-on corporate. She invited Sue to sit whilst they waited for someone from HR to attend. When the HR manager arrived, her days started to get worse. The company had received a report of a disturbance reported associated with a room booked by them. The room had been assigned to Sue whilst she was on the course the previous week. Unknown to Sue, despite the night manager taking pity on Sue and forgetting to log the reported incident, the couple that initially reported the incident the previous night asked the day manager, the following morning, if the woman in the room was okay, and that the matter had been properly investigated. Backpedaling to save her own job, the duty night manager said it had been an oversight on her part to log it, so it was logged, making its way back to Sue's company. As she sat with her manager and the head of HR, they placed a copy of the report from the night manager on the desk, plus CCTV images showing Sue dressed somewhat plainly whilst eating with her colleagues. Then later, dressed looking very different, her own manager looked at Sue, and the look she gave Sue said it all. "You cheap slut." She was told to go home pending a full investigation, and to not return to work until the full hearing. In the meantime, she was to clear her desk of all personal effects, and leave all company assets such as her laptop with security. She already knew she would never be returning to the office gainfully employed. Feeling distraught, she took her car and went to a country park that both her and Dave enjoyed walking around on a pleasant day, usually a Sunday afternoon, followed by a Sunday lunch in a nearby village pub. She began to doubt that it would happen again. Sitting on a bench, she considered how and when to talk to Dave. In the end, she thought it was best to throw herself at his mercy, explain how she got caught up in the excitement after one of her work colleagues had enjoyed having a one-off encounter with a stranger, and how she had convinced Sue it had done wonders for her marriage and sex life. At 2 o'clock she left to go home with a heavy heart and get prepared to face the music. As she turned into her cul-de-sac, she could see commotion at the end, outside her house. There appeared to be a crowd there. In fact, cars appeared to be parking up, and people were walking towards her house. And there was something there, up on her roof. What the hell was it? Whatever it was, it looked bright red in color. She ended up parking close to the entrance to the cul-de-sac, then walking the couple of 100 yards down to her house. As she got nearer, she stopped, hyperventilating. "No, please God, no, don't let this be happening," started to be the thought going over and over through her mind. In bright red gloss paint, dripping like blood, were the words "whorehouse" painted in giant letters across the entire upper front of the house, including the windows. It was also written numerous times in smaller words across the lower portion of the house too. Horrified, it was also daubed across the front door, the lawn and garage door. She suddenly realized that people were starting to point at her. Numerous people held up their mobile phones to film or photograph her. With that, she put her head down and tried to charge through the small crowd, letting herself in as parts of the crowd were catcalling and jeering, "Here's the whore of the house." Her plan was to go and close the curtains to hide them from view, but her heart sank. She fell to the floor, clutching her chest in a panic attack, realizing that there was no way back for her and Dave. Everywhere she looked, every possible surface that could be painted on were the words "whorehouse." Her only thought was that Dave must have shown symptoms for gonorrhea himself and been tested, with the same answers she had received. She found her phone and tried to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. In desperation, she left a message, pleading that he call her. She could explain it all. She loved him. She truly did love him. She finally got up and walked around the ground floor of the house. Every surface was daubed in red paint. Walking upstairs was the same. Each door was closed, the awful smell of drying gloss paint making her eyes sting. Opening their bedroom door, Dave had piled all of her lingerie onto the bed, then poured copious amounts of the thick red paint over them. Opening the sliding wardrobes revealed paint thrown directly from the can, had ruined every piece of clothing. Opening the bedside drawer sets revealed pools of red paint. The one containing their cache of sex toys had been filled to the brim with red paint. Dave had turned the toys on before they were submerged, the surface of the thick paint rippling from the subdued vibrations. Feeling sick, she went to the bathroom only to find their wedding album dropped into the pan of the toilet, red paint poured into the bowl, but, bizarrely, covered in gold glitter. It was then she noticed tools that didn't belong in the bathroom: the battery-powered angle grinder he had asked for as a gift for his last birthday, and a pair of mole grips. In the jaws of the mole grips there was a golden letter C. Picking them up, she realized exactly what had been clamped in the jaws. It was no letter C, it was once Dave's wedding ring. He had taken the grinder to it, turning most of the ring into dust, which was the glitter in the toilet bowl with her wedding album. With that, she started to puke on the floor. The whole wretched day finally made her succumb to the events, as her brain hit the safety button, and she fainted in the bathroom. When she awoke, she could smell and taste vomit that was all around her, her skin now tainted by the red gloss paint where he had painted those disgusting words whorehouse on the tiled surface. In one of the spare rooms, one corner was free of paint. She sat in a ball wedged in the corner, praying Dave would soon be home to start trying to help clear up the mess in the house, and the one she had made of their marriage. A few hours later it was dark. She had tried Dave's phone several times to no avail. Her own phone had pinged numerous times. Each time she looked praying it was Dave, but it was a friend or family member, or now more appropriately, ex-friend, making it clear her new status in their eyes. She opened some of the upper windows to try and shift some air around the rooms, and managed to just find enough pieces of clothing to change into some clean, albeit mismatched clothes. She managed to have a shower, but struggled to remove the red paint from her skin. In the garage she found a liter of white spirit, and used a fair proportion of it to remove most of it from her skin. The problem was, the whole town had seen she had been branded a whore. Even though the red paint was invisible to the naked eye, everybody would know that it was written invisibly across her body. As she started to gather her senses as best as she could, she used the white spirit to clean up her tablet. She logged on to see what the best way to remove the gloss paint would be, and was disheartened to discover that everything was more or less going to be right off in the house. She turned the mattress in the spare room over, and managed to find a single sheet that wasn't stained, plus a spare duvet they had saved, because it was in the backpack for storage. As for food, she had no appetite whatsoever. At 8 p.m. she finally answered one of many calls she had ignored from her daughter Chloe. Had Dave called her up at uni? "What the duck have you done, Mum? You and the house are all over Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. I've tried to call Dad, but he sent me a text at lunchtime to say he was sorry that he never measured up to be the husband you wanted. Those words, it's you, what the duck did you do?" Sue broke down and told her daughter almost everything. Some things she didn't go into detail. The only thing she omitted was that she had possibly passed on an STD, merely claiming Dave had somehow found out about her giving in to temptation. Her own private assumption was that he too had been diagnosed with gonorrhea. It was the only plausible explanation to explain his drastic actions. Sue asked Chloe what Dave had said. All she could tell Sue was that his marriage was over. He would contact Chloe, and for her not to worry about him. He declined to say where he was, or where he was going to be. After a dreadful night's sleep, she checked for anything from Dave and tried his number again. This time, it said the number was now unavailable. At 8 a.m. she rang his work number to be told he had come in at lunchtime the previous day, and handed his notice in with immediate effect, due to extenuating circumstances, and that he was moving out of the area. That was a new piece of information. She finally conceded to ring his sister. She expected an earful, and that's exactly what she received. He had told his sister what Sue had done, and how he had unfortunately found out. Sue begged that she pass the message on. The response was to listen to the sound of the line going dead. Towards the end of the week the sightseers started to wane, and the cul-de-sac started to normalize. Then it all blew up again, with no real interesting gossipy news. A big Sunday tabloid ran a front-page scoop on Sue and Dave. The headline read, "Whore on tour comes home to shock her." The front page picture was a drone shot looking down at the house from above. The red that Sue had seen on the roof the day she walked home was the largest rendition of the words whorehouse that Dave had painted, with the paint running down the tiles like blood. It summed up how Sue's heart felt, simply bleeding to death. Somehow the newspaper had traced her actions back to the hotel. In a double-page spread there were CCTV pictures of her in the hotel, assumingly brought via the back door from a dishonest hotel employee. They showed her eating with colleagues, then sitting in the bar later, the image just capturing her stocking tops as she must have on this stool. The subheading said, "Model wife by day, high-class hooker by night." There were 2 interviews with men who she had supposedly enticed to her room, offering full sex for £100. Apparently, according to the article, they both said she was a lousy lay, one even stating she should have paid him. There was also a grainy image of her walking into her room with a man. The damage was done. She had no way to disprove or stake her claim of innocence, at least as she was not prostituting herself out, and was simply looking for some excitement. In the end the council and police stepped in. A public nuisance order was put in place for anyone other than residents being in the cul-de-sac, which the police monitored, and the council stepped in with an order to remove the offensive paint from the exterior of the house within 72 hours, or they would contract it out, then seek to gain reimbursement through the courts. This led to the next big shock. Instead of combined funds of £72,000 in the bank, there was £2,000 in the joint account, enough to cover 1 month's worth of bills. The bulk of the money in the account had been put there by Dave, left to him as part of his parents' estate when they passed. It was all gone, moved to another account that was, she was told, not associated with the host bank. With this news she began to panic. She prayed that her disciplinary interview planned for the following Tuesday would consider she had suffered enough. She would soon find her thoughts were sadly misplaced. When she entered her soon-to-be ex-workplace, every look her way was of disdain. The looks she received were openly hostile, and she heard the odd slot, or whore whispered as she walked past the desks towards the meeting room. Her hearing took less than 10 minutes. Breaking various company rules, she had brought the company's good name into disrepute for her shameful behavior, and was summarily dismissed on the spot, with the prospect of no reference being made available. As she walked out, she looked across at Sarah, who had been looking her way. Sarah immediately looked down at her desk, pretending she hadn't seen Sue. As Sue started to walk towards her, she got up from her desk and walked briskly in the opposite direction. The security guard stopped Sue and took her to the exit. She was now jobless, husbandless, and now without friends. The council contracted out to have the offensive paint removed from the property. There was one small chink of light in that they understood her circumstances, and gave her 3 months to find the £6,000 it costs to remove all of the graffiti from the external parts of her property. Where Dave had used a ladder to climb on the roof, health and safety regulations meant that a full scaffold surrounding the house was required, explaining the astronomical cost. Income was now an issue. She found a job in a local cafe, but was asked to leave after a week because so many customers were making snide remarks about her, and it was upsetting other patrons. As the owner told her why, she asked did it also matter that it hurt her feelings too, hearing people call her those names. She left in tears, as his answer was simply if the shoe fits. A week later, she managed to get a job cleaning rooms for one of the national budget hotel chains. The pay was low, the work hard, but it allowed her to work on her own fairly anonymously. The mortgage was in both their names. Surely Dave would realize that it was as damaging for him as it was for her if they started to default. And that was the thing, Dave had simply vanished. If people such as friends or family knew, they either kept conversions short and rather impersonal, or simply ignored her. She could keep the wolves from the door with the job she held. A small tax rebate gave her some breathing space, but that was all. As life had rolled on, she rang the household insurance company, believing she could make a claim against all of the damage that had been caused by the red paint. She was immediately put through to a supervisor after they took the policy reference. It seemed that the property address had been shared in a national database of policies considered that fraudulent claims had been made against. It was explained that whilst she hadn't, the fact the property had received widespread national media exposure over the damage, an eagle-eyed claims investigator had logged the address, in case an attempt was made to claim this property. There was no claim to be made, none of the damage was accidental. One of the named policyholders had willfully caused the damage. Looking on YouTube, she found that leaving gloss paint to dry fully on many hard surfaces meant it could be carefully removed with a blade. With no friends or social life, she started to systematically remove as much of the paint as she could. For other furnishings and clothes, she went to a charity for abused women. This wasn't the typical person that they helped, but the good-natured manager could see she was a woman on the edge, so they provided her with some good second-hand bedding and mattress for her bed, along with a second-hand sofa. For clothes, she scoured the charity shops to assemble the best wardrobe of simple clothing that she could find. There was not one item that could even be remotely described as sexy. The idea made her feel sick. With regards to feeling sick, the letters started to arrive regarding payment for the removal for the external graffiti. With no money, unable to get a loan, things were not looking good. Then a small ray of light appeared in her life, one that she snatched at without thinking that the ray of light was simply peeking through some dark clouds, that the light would bring as a temporary respite before the storm clouds became closed over the light, making life darker. A national film production company contacted her in regards to making some films. Initially, she was dead set against the idea. They wanted her to make some corn films. Unbeknownst to her, deepfakes had been appearing with her head superimposed on other bodies. With an offer of £2,000 per film if she signed up for 3 films, she started to consider the offer. They found the final piece to buy her. The press had made out she was a lousy lay, which had spread from the original newspaper article, before ending up as a jibe at her expense on social media. This would be her chance to prove the nation wrong. Smelling the chance to have a new piece of talent, plus the additional exposure it would create for the company, once they leaked to the tabloid press that the woman simply nicknamed the Whorehouse Queen was making corn films, they would quickly make profit off the back of her notoriety. The key would be speed. Within 2 weeks she was on her back, down on her knees, up against a wall, or bend up against a kitchen worktop in the first production called Whorehouse Queen Gets Plugged. The premise of the film was she can't pay 2 electricians who do work, so pays with her body. Where this was once a fantasy she had dreamed to try, she spent the bulk of day retching in a toilet bowl during breaks in the filming, when she accepted how low she had finally sunk. After the first 3 films she signed up for a further 3 films on the basis she desperately needed the money. Dave had still not appeared, and her hope was she could use some of the money to hire a private investigator to try and track him down. to try and maintain the notoriety that the company were shamelessly exploiting. One film was her stealing her neighbor's husbands, one was about her being the office slot for the managers to use, and the one was turning her best friend into a lesbian. She had to be threatened with breach of contract to film this one. She found the idea of having sex with another woman abhorrent, and vowed never to make another pornographic film at any cost. A year later, her fragile financial status collapsed when the house was repossessed. A month beforehand at work one day, a tradesman staying the week in the hotel was laying on the bed jacking himself off when she entered his room to clean it. He had recognized who she was. In fact, he was watching the first porn film she'd made with the fake tradesman, and was laying waiting for her to enter his room. Declining his offer of £20 to duck her, she complained to the management, but it backfired. They had been unaware of her second stream of employment, even though she made it clear it was over. Like her earlier jobs, she was let go, with no reference yet again, for actions that could bring the company into disrepute. All this time, Dave made no contact with her. The only thing she saw was the notice filing for divorce. Dave had taken the cash and left her the equity in the house, but that had rapidly been eaten by defaulting on payments through lack of sufficient income. When she lost the house, she was declared bankrupt too. With no home and an unwillingness from her daughter to go and stay with her and her boyfriend, the stigma attached to her locally was so bad, she moved down to London, finding bar work to keep her alive and sharing the dubious flats to put a roof over her head. 5 years later, she met a man, Gilbert, a few years older than her. He was no oil painting, but now, neither was she. The stress and strain of life had really taken its toll on her. He was a religious man, working for a few charities. He lived simply, his only vice being a weekly trip to the local pub for a couple of beers, which is where Sue met him working as a barmaid. After a couple of months, he offered her the chance to come and live in his house, and she graciously accepted the opportunity to have a stable roof over her head. She had already told him all about herself and how she came to be where she currently was sitting with him at that very moment in time. They never married, their relationship was platonic, and never once did he seek out any form of sexual relationship. Driven by guilt, Sue never strayed despite sometimes feeling frustrated once in a while. She purchased a lifelike toy which she kept well hidden and used infrequently. She named it Dave, the only link back to her now ex-husband. She never did see him again, or even speak to him for that matter. She did find out he had left his life behind, picked up a job on an oil tanker. His background was heavy plant maintenance, so he adapted to his new life and sailed around the globe for a couple of years. Her daughter remained in contact by telephone and accidentally let it slip one day he had remarried. It came about when she mentioned her new brother. Dave had another child with his new wife, and by all accounts, he now lived abroad. When Chloe announced she was getting married, she thought this was her chance to see him and apologize for all of the harm and hurt she had caused. Initially disappointed that she did not have an invite to the actual ceremony, but would have the olive branch to attend the evening function. Although she was aware that Dave would not be present by time she arrived, Sue planned to ambush him by attending the church without their knowledge. When she arrived at the church stated on her invite, there was no wedding there. Going to the venue stated for the reception, they had no booking for her daughter. At 6 p.m. she received a text giving her a new address for the reception. By the time she arrived, Dave and his new family had left. It transpired that they anticipated she would try to reach out to Dave at the wedding, so they had a one-off wedding invite printed just for her, with false information. It was at that point she truly understood Dave would move heaven and earth to never set eyes on her again. It crushed her spirit. She felt as crushed as the day when she went home to find the mayhem he had caused. Being a good man, Gilbert consoled her. It was a dreadful price she had paid, but he told her she should revel in the fact that her daughter had given her this chance to reconnect with some of her own family and old friends. But it was going to be a long and difficult path, as many had no wish to even acknowledge her presence, let alone talk to her. She did find out that the root of all her ill luck, Sarah, had finally come unstuck in a big way. Continuing to play the games with her husband's support, she was in a hotel dressed up with her husband, actually dressed up for him, and not a play date, when one of the two men she had ducked the first time happened to be staying in the same hotel. Thinking that her husband was simply another player, he came over to Sarah and asked if she wanted a repeat performance with the guy with her, exactly like the time she was in the hotel with work. When Tony realized that he had been kept in the dark in the past, set up and she had already cheated on him, all hell broke loose. He broke the guy's jaw that had admitted to the earlier threesome with his wife and was so enraged, he punched Sarah, breaking her nose. Her husband ended up doing a 3-month stretch for assault, but once her company found out during the court case, she had broken the company rules. She found she was out the door quicker than Sue had been. Although she kept the house and kids, she was made a pariah and ended up moving, forced to downsize and hated by her teenage children, who felt she had ruined their lives by taking them away from all of their friends. She ended up sobbing most nights over what she once had. As her daughter's wedding reception wound down, Sue thought back to the fateful moment that Sarah told her what she had done. She had stupidly looked over the fence, and thought the grass looked greener the other side of the fence. The problem was that once she rolled around in that grass herself, it wasn't a patch on the grass back on her side of the fence, and whilst she was the other side, she saw her own grass disappear with Dave's scorched earth policy. A tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered to herself, "You stupid, stupid witch." And that's it for our two-part story, friends. If you enjoyed this story, drop a like and comment before you leave. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any video. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.